Joining us now is Kevin Shah. He's head of enterprise new business at Fujifilm Europe. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So to kick us off, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing at HIMSS this week?
So at HIMSS this week, we're talking really about AI, how it can affect care, how it can improve patient outcomes, and ultimately, how can clinicians go from what they currently use to something that can augment what they do without it necessarily affecting them in a negative way? How do we get from AI being a concept to being a deliverable, and what can it really achieve, the reality versus the marketing hype?
This is really your wheelhouse, isn't it, Mia?
I mean, I'm super excited. So tell us about the challenges you tell.
So as we found with clinicians in the past, if you give them different applications and they have to use those different applications to deliver outcomes, they normally find it's frustrating. In radiology in particular, mouse clicks. Too many mouse clicks means that they won't do it. If they have to look at different applications, it takes time. They're massively overworked. So we see in the UK, one in 5 roles is empty at the moment. 3 in 5 roles are currently unfilled.
Wow.
There's only 50% of trainee radiologists coming in. So even if you double the intake of new radiologists, you still don't backfill the gap. And then when someone retires at 65 and you have someone new coming in at late 20s, having just finished university, they're super well trained, but they don't have 30 years of experience of looking at images and seeing, what is this that I'm seeing? How do I make the most accurate diagnosis based on what I'm seeing? So we have a big gap, and AI could fill some of that gap. But there are also questions about how do we get clinical validation? How do we make sure this is safe? How do we make sure that it's going to do what we expect it to do every time? And then the regulatory part with most software applications now, you get approval on your application, you deliver an upgrade, you get that checked, and then you send that. Apply that, implement that in the customer's site. With AI, the idea really is about big learning, constantly learning from data sets.
Right.
And how do you stop bias? So we've seen it with autonomous cars, the car's going down a road, does it crash into the lady with a child, the old guy? The human has to make the decision on what it programs the AI to do, and we aren't quite at the point yet where we're ready to get to that point in healthcare. So it's a tremendous step forward to help with the capacity, and it's arduous. A radiologist sits in a dark room looking at a black and white screen, scrolling through black and white images, counting lumps. That's hard work. So if we can automate the process and we can help them, very quickly highlight some things, then they can do more quickly. And ultimately that then means that the patient gets a better diagnosis more quickly. And ultimately the sooner you diagnose, the more chance there is of you having a better outcome at the end.
Right. I think often when we talk about AI, people sort of paint it as this panacea, right? It's just going to solve all
Everything.
of our problems, right? But you made the point of saying, like, some of this process, right? So do you see a sort of interplay where that radiologist remains, but they get to leverage this as sort of another pair of eyes that doesn't get tired in the dark?
So as a patient, I don't want to receive an email from an AI engine saying, Kevin, we found a lump.
Right.
In your lungs, and it's grown 6 mil over the last 12 months. Right? That's not what I want. When if something happens, and it happened to me, something happens to me, I want to sit in a room with a clinician who has eye contact with me, who says, Kevin, got some bad news for you. This is what we're going to do. We're going to do the best we can, but based on what we've seen, we think that we've got a way of treating you. Right? That's what you want. The clinicians, of course they're not perfect, right? They're overworked, they work long hours in difficult situations and complex morbidity when you've got different diseases. Absolutely. An AI engine can be, so it's very easy to get 4 or 5 coders to build an algorithm which will show on a very specific clinical data set, it will show calcification, a nodule in a chest, in a lung, in a breast. That's relatively easy. But when you've got multiple different disease types and really complex anatomy and physiology, it's much more difficult. And we see in pediatrics. So when you talk to a pediatric hospital, when you talk to them about AI, what they say is, no one's really knocking on our door because it's too difficult. There isn't the data set. So, we're talking, our platform, Riley, what we're doing with that is we're creating a platform that we have our own Fujifilm developed algorithms. We've got a team in Japan that are doing that. We work with third parties, so we know there are some other companies that have been doing it longer than us. They've got really, really good skill sets. So we'll engage with them to create the transmission method from the X-ray CT MR is taken, gets sent into the system, a broker sends it to an algorithm, it then comes back. And you could have arguably a chest X-ray that goes to 3 or 4 different algorithms, and then the clinician sees it without, then he sees it with one, then he sees it with the second, then he sees it with the third. And based on what they see, all we're hoping to do is give them the best possible chance of making the right diagnosis.
Right.
I just wanted to. There was something that I was curious about. You know, there's sometimes, of course, you know, we're talking about the algorithms and so on and so forth, but we also see that sometimes the data gets siloed between different departments. So, are you using any other technologies as well to sort of facilitate that in order for the system also to learn? You know, so the workforce go through the learning curve, but sometimes the system needs to do it too. So, how do you consolidate all these data sets?
So there's tremendous amounts of information around population health. So, you know, my mum's Norwegian, my dad's Indian, I live in London. So I'm slightly unfortunate in there isn't thousands, tens and hundreds of thousands of people like me, so they can't look at my data set and say, oh, based on this, the fact that you eat more fried food than someone in Italy, you're more likely to get this particular disease. So there is definitely some population management and some data sets that are being used to add into this kind of AI algorithm. We're more focused on the image and the pathology. We're not really moving and working with that technology, but there's some really, really clever companies that are. And I was talking to a guy who was exactly in that field, and he was saying, so some of this genomics AI, you know, where they're looking at DNA data and genes, and they're saying, okay, so if we find something out about someone, we then have to, we have a duty of care to tell them. So there's a whole new business of genetic therapists. So, you know, providing information to patients about things that may happen to them in 20, 30 or 40 years' time. So this whole AI kind of piece, it covers almost every element of life and healthcare. And we're working specifically in one area because that's our expertise. And then there are other areas where I think in time we will create a new platform of proactive healthcare rather than reactive healthcare. So now if you're sick, you go to the hospital, you have an X-ray or a CT, then you see a doctor, the doctor then sends it to a consultant, the consultant then reads the image, he then may get a second opinion. They then have a tumour board, MDT, so then they get 4 or 5 people in the room because it's a bit difficult, they're not sure what it is. So that process can take weeks, it can even take months. And if you have, you know, the difference between being diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer with a 4% chance of survival, or stage 1 lung cancer with a 78% chance of survival, and that's a 74% difference just by diagnosing early. So screening, genetic review, all of those things can move us into a proactive healthcare environment rather than reactive, which is where we currently are.
That's really the goal, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm gutted to tell you, Kevin, we are out of time, but this has been such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.